As I was mentioning, last week we started creating this Java server on this directory using the Spring Boot framework, and we can run that to see where we are using just the command line with the compiled and packaged version here under this jar file. This starts up the server, it boots up, and then listens to an incoming request at port 8080. All right, there it is. So let's, if we hit that server here, let's see where we were. I think that this was the hello world, and we had created a user admin directory under there. I think, what was it, user, was it admin? I forget. There it is. I think this is it. Yeah, I think this is where we left off, right? That we could load data from a server, and let's see if we're getting some errors here. Looks like we are. Failed to load. So it looks like it went out to the server, and the server is complaining that it's not getting any data from the server. We can take a look at the network access here. Notice that it's fetching. The first thing that it downloads is the HTML document, obviously. Then the HTML document have references to other documents, right? It references the CSS, so it goes off and retrieves the CSS. It has references to jQuery, has references to this JavaScript file. And then this JavaScript file is the last thing that it loads. We can look at the source code. Right, that's what the source code looks like. Actually, let's view it here. We can say go to source. And we can see the JavaScript there that we downloaded. And I know we were playing around with a couple things here. Let's see where it's complaining. Let's see. It said that somewhere we went to fetch users, but it complained saying that I could not find it. So somewhere in here we're looking for users. Looks like this was where we were looking for it, right? It said remember that find all users. I don't know, can you see that? Let's make that a little bit bigger. Let's make that smaller here. There we go. Right, so this is where we're retrieving it. So somewhere this URL is failing. So on the server side, presumably we had a controller. This was working last time we looked at. Let's see what's going on here. Let's open up using our favorite editor or WebStorm or IntelliJ or anything that you prefer. Since we're going to look at the Java server, I'm opening up STS because it's specific for STS. It has a lot of tooling that deals with Spring Boot. All right, let's see. I believe this was the controller that we had built that exposed the get mapping for retrieving all users. Let's see what is complaining about. If we refresh, it's still going out to localhost 8080/users. So 8080/users. So I guess users is not mapped. It's not finding it. Users. This is users. Why are you not finding users? Return users. REST controller. User, private users. So this should be fine. I'm sorry? I never updated, but at least it should return whatever I have here. Yes. I'm sorry? Are we running the same server? Oh, maybe I never compiled it back. Probably I'm looking at an older version of the server. You're right. Let me stop the server. Start the server. We can recompile here. Maven clean install. Probably that jar file was from an older version that didn't have the REST controller. So let's run it again. Let's hit it. Okay, now we do. Thank you. Yeah, so we do have that data there. Let's go back to our page, and now it seems to be working, right? It goes and fetches those 3 users. Everybody okay? All right. Okay, so the other part that we were going to be focusing today was perhaps adding a brand new user. Perhaps I can type the username, password, first name, last name, click on create, right, and we'll go off and send the data to the server, right? Before we do that, right, I believe we were trying to convert everything back into a user array list. I'm not quite sure if we were able to do that. Let's see if we can. Notice that we are declaring user arrays to be to have the same content as users. Let's see if that worked. Here I'm going to replace this user array. I'm going to return instead list user because I'm going to try and return this array. The reason I'm going to try and return this array is because we want to be able to append to this array, right, when we create a brand new one. So let's do that. I'm going to replace this with user array, with list user, right, and I'm going to return user array list. Okay, let's see if that works. I'm going to stop the server. I can still recompile from here, right, and restart the jar file, or I'm going to try and do it from STS or IntelliJ. IntelliJ will have ways to also run it from your IDE. But in any case, the entry point from the IDE will always be the main class of a Spring Boot application. And it's found under the main Java, the root package, and there's the main file, right? The main file, if you built this using the tool, the STS tool, it will give it a generic name such as demo application, right? But this is the entry point to the Spring Boot application. Notice that it has the main function, right? This is the entry point to the Spring Boot application. When you say Java jar and the jar file, this is the main function that runs. Yep. So instead of running it from the main clean install and running it from the command line, I can start from here too. I can right click it and I can say run as a plain old Java application, right? So this is the same effect as running it from the command line. It should compile it, package it, run it, right, and there it is. So it's starting up and still same thing, right? It's listening at port 8080. But now it's running within the IDE. Everybody okay? Right? All right, so now that we did that, we can go back and try this out, see if we broke it. Looks like we didn't break it, right? We're returning a list array instead of returning a user array. Okay? Right? With the benefit that now I can perhaps send data and I can manipulate that array on the server. All right? All right, so let's do that. So what we want to try and do here is create an event handler that listens to this create, reads all these values, right? It packages this in a JSON object, sends it over to the server, and the server presumably will append it to this array. Okay, so let's try that. Well, first let's create an event handler on this create. Let's see. I don't like STS for editing HTML and JavaScript and whatnot, so I'm going to switch over to WebStorm. Right, so I'm going to bring up WebStorm. So I use STS to code my Java, whereas I use WebStorm to code my JavaScript, even if it's the same project though, right? Okay, so I believe this is another project for the online version. Let me open up the summer 1. Where is it? What? Close project? Oh, there it is. Okay, excellent. All right, so there's my JavaScript here, right? And what we want to be able to do is grab that create button, and let's see, are we doing anything with that create button? Copy, paste, let's see. Okay, there it is. So there's the create button, and it's we're using jQuery to fetch it from the DOM, and then once we have it in the DOM, we're binding it to an event handler, a click event handler, and this is the function that is the callback that will be invoked when we create that. So let's see what that create button do right now. Right now, it just reads the username, password, and whatnot, creates the JSON object, yes, and then it appends to the user DOM. Right, let's see what the append user DOM does. Okay, so it just clones the row, right, and it populates the row, and then it's appended. That's not really what we want. That's a temporal, right? That's a transient solution, right? It only updates the row on the client, but it never tells the server that there's this new object, right? Obviously, if I refresh, I would lose all my changes. Yes, right. So I believe that still might work, right? So if indeed I type in some bogus and say create, indeed it is appending it. Yes, but if I refresh, it's all gone because it's not on the server. So we could do it. We could do two ways. We could take a optimistic approach to this, where I append it to the row, right, and then I optimistically send it to the server with the hope that everything will be okay, and the server will say, yep, I added it, and maybe get some confirmation, right? Or I can take a more pessimistic approach and says, well, I won't actually add it to the row, to the DOM, until I have confirmation from the server that indeed this has been added to the server. Or I can take a really, really pessimistic approach and send this information to the server, and the server will respond with all brand new data. Okay, and I'll refresh the entire page. So it depends how pessimistic, how optimistic you are. Depends on whether you're the only person editing this page. It could be multiple folks editing the same page. Yes, and I might be working with a stale version of the page. Yes, there might be other user administrators that are adding users. Okay, and I might be working with a stale version of this page, right? So I might in those cases where it's multiple users, multi-threaded, everybody's editing the same piece of information, right? I should be as pessimistic as possible, right? If instead I know it's just me, just editing my information, my profile, that nobody else is touching this, then I could be fairly optimistic. Yes? So the design decision depends on your particular circumstances. Make sense? I'm going to take the most pessimistic approach. I'm going to send the object over to the server, and then I'm going to ask the server to return an entire list of the brand new list of users, because there might be more users, right? There might be some other user administrator adding users to the same array. Yes? Okay. Luckily, all these arrays on the server are all thread safe. Okay. If there's another thread running, it locks, waiting for other threads to complete, so we don't have to deal with that. Yes. No. Yep. As long as I hit it, create, it should show there. If I refresh, it still should be there. Okay. All right. So excellent. We do have the part where we at the create we are able to create a user object. Instead of appending it right away to the DOM, I'm going to send it over to the server. Okay. Now, notice that in several places we're talking to the server. We are talking to it when we delete a user. We send an AJAX call. When we go fetch the data from the server, we're also making an AJAX call here. Okay, that spreading our code to deal with a remote resource all over our code is considered to be a bad practice. Ideally, we would concentrate all data access into one single or just a few reusable components, right? That anybody who wants to talk to and interact with the data would go through this one set of dedicated classes or dedicated objects. Okay. So what we're going to do here is that instead of using the AJAX here, and then another AJAX here for delete, and maybe another AJAX call to create over here, we're going to centralize that into one single place. Yes? It's a good practice. Also, if you're doing data access, same thing. Usually, you don't spread your data access all throughout your code. You centralize that in a few data access objects. Yes? It's a very common design pattern. Yes? Right? So same thing we're going to do here. We're going to create here a separate directory under web app. There it is. We already created it, called services. Right? Services. We're going to encode there any any communication back to the server, that's why these are called services. We're going to go through files that go through here, right? So we're going to create one service per data type, right? So for instance, if we want to talk to this user, there will be a user service. If we want to talk to courses, there will be a course service. Yes, right? And each one of these courses, each one of these services, is going to include all the data operations that we would possibly do with that particular data type, right? So if it's users, we will have create users, delete users, find a user, search for users, whatever, delete users will be there. In the course service, there will be create courses, remove courses, update courses, find all courses, whatever. Yes? Right? All the CRUD operations for a particular data type will be encapsulated in a particular service. That's a good practice, right? This will create a single point of maintenance, for any data access that we can possibly use. So let's create here a user.service.client.js. Okay. All right. Excellent. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to encode all the logic that we need for talking to the user data. Right. So for instance, in here, the find users URL. Typically, what we're going to do is that we're going to grab that, and we can go into our user service and create an abstraction layer. We can say find all users, and we're going to encapsulate the AJAX in there. See that? Okay. Perhaps we can pass as an argument the callback here. We said we're going to pass the callback here. What is this complaining about? User.service.client.js. Oh, function. There we go. Okay, so find all users. What else could we have here? Maybe function delete user, right? And delete user. We could put in the source code for delete users. Where was that? Delete user. It was this one right here, right? There it is. And this, both of these use a URL, right? Notice that we have a find all users URL, and I believe where was that? It was somewhere up here, right? These two URLs should also live in here. So in here, we would encapsulate everything that we need to talk to the server, right? It will be one single place where have all interactions with the server will be this one file. Yes? All right. And today we're going to do one more. We're going to do function createUser, and the createUser is going to take our argument, a user object that will contain the username, the password, the first name, the last name that we've created from the DOM, right? We've retrieved all this, yes? And we're going to call it from where? From the createUser. This createUser, there's our user object. So presumably here is where we would call createUser, and we would pass the user object. Now, if we do this, we're going to enter an infinite loop, right? Instead, we need this function. We need the function of this createUser actually be the one that is declared here in my user service client. Correct? Right? So what we could do here is that we could include this inside of a constructor, inside of a class. Right? We could say maybe function user service. Right? And we can declare these functions inside our class. Okay, and then we can declare this as a class instance that has references to all these functions. So we can say this.createUser. I guess we could say this.createUser is equal to this function. Okay, same thing with all these. Right? So this will be this dot find all users is equal to this function, right? And finally, this dot delete user is equal to this function. Okay. Now if I create an instance of this user service using a new operator, I'm going to create an instance of this class, and then I can access each one of these functions through that instance. Yes? Right? Okay, so let's do that. Let's load this user service from the HTML. Let's load it. Let's see. Let's load it right before our user admin client. So this will be script load that service. So that's under services. I'm going to go back up one, down to services, and down to user service. There it is. We loaded it. So now inside of my client, I can instantiate it. I can say create an instance, const user service, new user service. Right, so now I have an instance of that class that I declared elsewhere. Notice the syntax here. In JavaScript, to create a class, right, it's just another function. Right, it's just like any other function. Right, the syntax is a little bit weird here, but it's just a function that it's treated. If you put a new in front of that function, it's treated as a constructor. Right, and whatever variables you declare on this instance are the local fields of that class. Right? So for instance, I might declare this.find, right? Might declare on the instance, right? As opposed to having this global, right? As opposed to having these global, we can bring them in here. Okay, we did the find all. The same thing we could do with this.delete user and declare it in there, right? Now these URLs would be part of the instance. This.find all users, this.url, and whatnot. Okay? Yes? Yeah, it's all self-contained inside of this particular instance. Yep. Yes? Yeah, we're going to use fetch now. Yeah, we'll use fetch. Right. Yeah, so we've been using Ajax, which is a function that is provided by the jQuery library. There's a whole bunch of competing libraries out there that can talk to services through the URL, right, through HTTP. There's Axios is one of the more popular libraries out there, but we need to download it. We need to link to it. There's one that comes with JavaScript out of the box, right? So that we don't actually even need jQuery to talk to the server, right? And that one is a function called fetch. There's a function called fetch that pretty much does the same thing as jQuery's Ajax. Yes.
Fetch technically is part of the JavaScript standard. It's part of the web browsers.
Yeah, WebKit. Right, exactly. Yep. We're going to be using fetch. It's a higher level abstraction over that lower level API. But what this particular implementation has for it is that it uses a modern mechanism of dealing with asynchronous communication. Right. Notice that this JavaScript is running on your browser, yes? And it's talking to a server that is running on, not necessarily on the same machine. Actually, more typically, it will not be running on the same machine, yes? Right? The JavaScript gets downloaded from the server, right? If you see it graphically, right? Here's your browser, halfway across the world, and it's communicating with a server that is, halfway across the world. Yes, right? We first ask for the HTML. It downloads. So here's now copied over here in the HTML. The HTML has references to a JavaScript, which gets downloaded, and now it has a copy here of the JavaScript. The JavaScript starts running, And as this JavaScript starts running, asks for data. Right? It says, I need users. I need whatever. I need new data. So this one is going to generate an HTTP request back to the server. And so here's a problem, right? This is running halfway across the world, and this server is also running half across the world. Yes? Right, now you have two processes running simultaneously on two different machines that need to talk to over a network. Yes? Right? With the following restrictions. One of them is that the browser has only one JavaScript thread running on the browser. Yes? Okay. Whenever JavaScript is running, there's only one thread. Right? It's not multi-threaded. Okay, that's one problem. The other problem is that this HTTP request, it could take a while. It could take anywhere between a couple of milliseconds. It could take seconds. It could even not ever come back. Correct? Right? We cannot risk this one single thread ever blocking, waiting for this request never to come back. It would completely block our code running on the client. Yes, it's very dangerous. So what typically we do what typically happens is that instead of implementing it so that this JavaScript blocks and waits for this request to come back from the server, typically what happens is that the JavaScript will delegate the request to the browser. Say, hey browser, you know how to download a whole bunch of things, right? You downloaded the CSS, you downloaded the JavaScript, you can download images, and you have a whole bunch of threads, right? Why don't you deal with this HTTP request? Go ahead and go fetch this for me, and notify me later at some point in the future. And that's what we've been doing using jQuery's AJAX, right? The default behavior for JavaScript AJAX is to do an asynchronous. That first A means asynchronous. These calls are all asynchronous, and that's synchronous, meaning that thread is not going to wait. Instead, it sends the request, and then it keeps going doing other things, right? Maybe animating the ad, animating the kittens or whatever. So it's still animating and running on your window, right? While this is going, when it comes back, it returns. When it comes back, it notifies the JavaScript. In this case, we've configured here the callback. It says, okay, when it comes back, notify that function over here. Everybody good? All right, we're still going to do that. But fetch goes a little bit one step further. One step further. Another problem when we're working with asynchronous calls, one problem that we have is that oftentimes we're not making just one call, right? Oftentimes we're not making one single call. Oftentimes we're making lots of calls at the same time, right? Where I need to hit this database for user authentication. I need to go fetch a token. I need to go and hit somebody's account. I need to go and fetch something from some other API. And then it needs to happen in a particular order, right? Say I need to fly to Chicago for my daughter's graduation. It says, well, I'll need a car, I need a hotel, and I need a flight. Yes? If any one of those three fails, I'm not going to Chicago, right? So sometimes I need to synchronize and say, well, all these three things happen or none of them happen. Okay? But all three of them are happening asynchronously, at their own time. I'm hitting orbits, I'm hitting hotels.com, and I'm hitting Hertz, right? And these are all asynchronous calls to all three APIs, yes? And I need to be able to synchronize all three and wait for them, yes? But because they're asynchronous, I'm not guaranteed any particular order, correct? Right? But I need to be able to wait for them to come back, you come back, and then it says, okay, I got all three, I'm going to Chicago. Make sense? So it's very hard to synchronize things that are happening asynchronously. So what a technique was invented, invented, which are called promises. They're called promises, right? That allows us to create easily synchronize multiple things that are happening simultaneously. Because imagine that you have this Ajax, and that this Ajax, makes a call to orbits. When it comes back, it says, well, now I need to make a call to hotels.com, and when it comes back, I need to go back to Hertz. I'm going to end up with Ajax nested within Ajax, nested within inside of Ajax. This is going to look awful. It's going to look horrendous, right? Code that is inside of code, inside of code, inside of code. So to solve that, libraries such as fetch, okay, use a mechanism called promises, right? So what you get back from fetch, right? Fetch, you provide a URL. It works the same way as Ajax. You provide the URL, but what it comes back with, this function comes back with a promise that presumably you can register and say, hey, did you get back the responses? Well, not quite yet. I promise I'll come back with you. When the data comes back from the server, I promise that at some time in the future, hopefully short time in the future, I will notify you and let you know when the response came back. Okay, and the mechanism, the API is as follows: fetch returns a promise, right? Fetch returns a promise, which we can assign to a function p, and then we can use p to provide an event handler that says handle the response. Handle the response. Right. So here we are providing a callback to say, hey, when the promise resolves, when the promise is fulfilled, right, that the data came back from the server, notify me by calling that function. Let me know. Right? Let me know when it came back from the server. I can't wait, right? Because I'm the single thread. If I stop here waiting for you, I have to do a whole bunch of other things, right? I have to do animations. I have to do, I have to do all sorts of other things. I can't wait, right? So instead, notify me when it comes back over here. Make sense? Right? All right. So let's try and do it. All right. So let's do a fetch. So fetch takes a URL, and the URL it's going to be the same URL as before. So HTTP ://localhost 8080, right? It's going to be users, right? That's the first argument. The second argument to fetch, by default, fetch does a get, just like Ajax. Ajax, by default, it does a get. If you give it a URL, it'll go and fetch data from that URL. Yes? Right? This case, we want to send this user object to the server, and we can't do that with get. Get is for getting. Yes? If we want to send data, we need to post the data. We need to send the data over to the server. So to do that, we're going to use an optional second argument, which is a configuration object. It's a configuration object where, for instance, you could say that the method is a post, not a get. Right? We can override the default. Right? We can say that the method that we're going to use is a post. Also, we can say, oh, I'm going to send some data over. I'm going to send you some data. So I can say that, and I want to embed that data as part of the body that I'm going to send to the server, as the HTTP body. Right? The HTTP request has a header, has a body. The header typically allows you to put cookies in there, allows you to do all sorts of things. So we can say that in the body, we want to put this data user. Now this user typically will be a JSON object. Oftentimes, what we'd like to be able to do is encode that as a string. We would like to convert that as just a plain string, just as ASCII. Right? It'll be the responsibility of the server to parse this string and convert it back into some Java object. Okay? So So to convert a user into a string, right, there's a utility that does that allows it to convert a JSON object to a string representation, and it's called a JSON library. So this JSON library comes with every browser, and allows you to stringify, to convert a JSON object into a string. Make sense? Everybody good? Another thing that we need to configure is we need to let the server know that this is not any string, right? I mean, the server looks at this string and it says, how should I interpret this string? What is it? Is it an email? Is it a PDF document? What is it? Is it an image? I don't know what it is. So we need to tell it how to interpret this data that we're sending. Yes? Right? So to do that, we use the headers. We can configure headers, HTTP headers. And in the headers, we can say that the content type, you should interpret this string. You should interpret this string as JSON, application JSON. Right? The server's going to say, it's a JSON object. Okay, I know what to do with a JSON object. Right? It'll parse it as a JSON object. It will instantiate a Java object with the same with the same fields, right? With the same values that you passed in, and hopefully it'll all go well. All right, excellent. Let's see. Let's try just this. All right, let's see. This is on the client side, and when is this being invoked? It's being invoked here, right? When we do the create. Here's a create. It's going to be using the the user service dot create. All right, excellent. Just to see if this is working and that we haven't broken anything, we're going to do a console log user and see if we can display that user on the console. Yes? All right, let's try it out. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to bring up the console. Right, and I'm just going to type some bogus information. I say create. All right, notice that indeed we can step through this. Right, we reached that. We did create user. We sent that. We called the create user. We can actually step through this, right? We should learn how to step through this. So let's we'll do a create. There it is. We're going to step into that function. There it is. We got a user with the information, a first name, last name, password, and whatnot. Right? So we're good, right? So we are in this object, and it's about to do a post. Let's do a go. Notice that it's complaining. Let's see what it's complaining about. We can look at the console. It says, I did a post, but the server responded with a 405. Responded with a 405. We can also look at the network. There is the users. We'll look at that. Yeah, we sent out a post. The server responded with a 405. I believe that means that this method doesn't exist. Yes. Or that method is not allowed or something. Anyway, notice if you scroll a little bit down, you'll also see the payload. See the payload? Meaning this is the data that we're sending over the wire. You see that? Right? You can look at it in the string format. This is the raw string format that is being sent over. But notice that also the header, look at the headers. And notice that these are the headers that we're sending over to the server. Notice that we are indeed sending this header, that the content type is application JSON. See that? The server is going to use that to determine and say, this is not just any string. Right? It's not text. It should be interpreted as an object. All right? And this is what the server is going to do to be able to reinstantiate a Java instance with the same what Java is going to do, try and do, and it's find an object that has the fields, the same fields as the object that is being passed along. Right? Notice that this object has a username, has a password, has a first name. It's going to try and map it to an object that has the same schema. Yes? Right, so let's try and do that. So we haven't done anything on the server. Let's go now to the server side, right? We did the client side. Let's do the server side. All right, so on the server side, here's my user controller. We have the find all users, and we have the delete user. Let's now listen for an incoming post. That's what we're sending, right? We're sending a post. See that? To this URL. All right, so let's do that. I'm going to be listening for an incoming post request, right? And it's going to be mapped to /users. And I'm going to call this the method here the same name that I chose on the client, right? We called it createUser on the client. I'm going to call it createUser also on the server, just so that I can keep it straight in my head, right? That calling that createUser on the client is going to hit this createUser on the server. Yes? Right? Now, ideally, we would get what? An instance of a user. Right? That's what we would get on the server side. Right? But how are we going to get this user? I know it's in the body. Right? I know it's being sent as part of the payload of the body. So to do that, we can configure and tell Java that in this HTTP request that is coming, in the body, there are some JSON objects, right, that we would like to be parsed, processed, and then ideally it would create an instance of this user. Yes? Right? All right, so to do that, we can use the annotation request body. Right? Basically, we're saying map whatever's in the body, try and map it to this Java user object. Yes? Right? And indeed, user does have a username, just like the incoming request has a username. See that? And has a password. Also, the incoming request has a password. And first name also has a first name. See that? So it's going to try and map whatever I send over and the structure of the JSON. It'll try and map it to the structure in Java. Yes? All right, so let's do that. Let's just to see if it worked. What we're going to do is that we're going to echo back. The same user that I sent. We're going to echo it back to the server, to the client, right, and see if it matches. So I'm just going to return the same user you sent me. I can just send it back to you. Just to verify that you're getting what I'm sending. Yes? All right, so let's try it out. I'm going to restart the server. Restart the server. And I'm going to refresh. Okay, there's my users. So I'm going to send here, I'm going to look at the network. Use the network, and I'm going to send Alice, Bob, Charlie. So let's do Dan. Dan123, Dan123, and Dan123. So I'll do a create. Okay, notice that I'm stepping through. I'm going to remove that. I'll say, okay, go. Let's go to a network. Notice that this time it didn't complain. Notice before it said a 405, yeah, right? This time it didn't complain. This is a 200, means okay. Yes, I did hit the server. And let's look at the response. We know that we were able to send a post. Notice that it's 200 now, not 405. I did send Dan123. Now the preview here is going to tell us what the response is. The response, this is what the server is responding to us. Right? This is what's coming from the server. See that? It's the ID is 0. That's because I never set the ID. And there's my username. There's my password. This is my first name. And last name is null because I never sent the password. Right? So indeed, the server is receiving the data. It is correctly parsing it and mapping it to an instance object. Right? And it's just echoing it back to me. Are we okay? All right. So the last thing we need to do is, since we know it's getting to the server, we should be able to just append it to my user array list. Okay? So let's just do that. We'll say user array list dot add, and we'll just add the user. Okay? And then I'm just going to return the user array list, which presumably will have this brand new user added to that array list. Yes? But this has to be of different type. This has to be a list of users, right? That comes back. Everybody good? Yes. Yeah, we never did the ID, right? So on the ID side, perhaps on the client, we can, obviously this is all going to eventually end up in the database, right? Eventually it'll be the database, once it does an insert, right? It'll do an auto increment and it'll choose an ID for us, right? So we don't have that yet. But for now, what we can do is say user.id is equal to new date and get time. So that will give us a unique ID. As long as the second law of thermodynamics holds, this will be an ever-increasing number into the future. Okay, so we're going to use that as a unique identifier, right? That is incremented. So let's try it out. Let's try it out again. So let's create another one. So do a create. Here's a second user. That ID was not sent. Wait, what? Maybe I need to refresh. Yeah, there we go. Let's try it again. So Dan, Fred, and Fred, and then Fred. Flintstone. And then so we say create. It didn't work. Wait, what? What happened? 400. Did I say create or? The ID? Oh. Oh, right. Probably. Let's see. Did the server complain? Source, reference, change, it didn't like the ID. Didn't like the ID. Okay. Let me stop that. Maybe we can declare like a long. Let's see. User. I guess maybe we can declare this as long. Can I change it here? Refactor, extract interface, pull, blah blah blah. Long. Do I have other things here that are complaining? This might need to be long here. Anywhere else? Okay, let's try it again. Where? The constructor? Oh, yeah, okay. Stop that. Let's see, this is long. And let's try it again. And let's update that so it's Fred. Let me refresh this, reload the page on the client. I'm going to do a create. It's still, oh my goodness, a 500. What does the server say? Let's see. Unsupported operation exception null. Create user in line 45. Line user, add user. I'm sorry? Let's see. What are you complaining about? 500 operations. So okay, so things that something is null that should not be null. Last name? Maybe.
That should be fine though. The string is null.
Yeah, that's fine. Long. Maybe let's see. User request body. Maybe we could put a breakpoint here. Let's stop it, and then we can restart. Yes. Yeah. As list is not mutable. Say again. Linked list. What? Oh, really? Okay. And casted where? Here? So linked list. Like that? Linked list, and this would be a linked list. What is it? Okay. All right, can you say that again? So this is a list.
Private list user array list equals new array list user in parentheses array stuff as list users.
You have it on a repository?
I do have it on a repo, and I did share the repo with you. But so just okay. So change list user into array list user.
Into
Take it out of parentheses.
array list.
Yep. Take it, and then put the parentheses around arrays.as list users.
Like that?
No. Arrays as list, and then the users. Yeah. So.
Right, and then new.
Get rid of the space between. Yeah, between user and. Yep. There you go.
Okay. All right. Let's try that. Let's try that. All right. Yeah. So array lists are mutable, right? Okay. All right. So let's try it again. So let's refresh. Let's create here Fred. Fred. And do a create. All right. Now, so this time worked. Thank you. Notice that let's look at the what we sent over. That's fine. And look at the response. We can preview it so that it looks a little more easier. Notice that indeed it has our third user in there. See that? Right. So it was able to add it, except obviously the last name. We have the first name. We have the username. So great. So we were able to append data to that array. But notice that our local DOM didn't change, right? So even though the server is coming back saying, "Yep, I was able to add it," the client has no clue that this actually happened. It's because we never actually told the client what to do, right? We just finished just sending this fetch. We send it over to the server, but we didn't do anything after that, correct? Right, so what we need to be able to do is have handle the response that came back from the server. Once the response comes back from the server, I want to do something with that response. Yes? Right. So to do that, I can either assign it here to we can assign it to a promise, right? And then that promise allows us to provide a function that we want to handle. We want to be notified that actually something happened, right? So for instance, what we could do is that declare here a function, and that function is going to be passed the response from the server. And we could take a look at the response. We can say, well, look at the response. We can say console.log response. Let's look at that. Let's refresh. Let's add another user, some bogus user, and do a create. There's our user, our console. Let's see what got displayed. Promise. I'm sorry. No, I missed something. Promise.then. Right. So promise is an object that comes back from fetch, and that object has a function called then. That function allows us to register a function that we can invoke. Let's try it again. So let's refresh. Some bogus, create. There it is. There's the response that comes back from the server, right? Not really what we were looking for. Ideally, what we would like to see is the actual array, right, of objects, of users that is coming back from the server. That's fine. We can get a hold of it. That's probably in the body, which we cannot parse. We need to parse it into some JSON representation here on the client. That body could be anything. It could be a download of a PDF document. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It could be anything that's coming from the server, right? We need to somehow tell it, hey, interpret that body that's coming from the server. Interpret it as JSON, right? Coming back from the server, which is an array, right? It's an array of JSON. So to do that, there is a function that allows you to do that, which is called the JSON function on the response. That's going to parse the response from the server. It's going to convert it into a JSON object, and then we can spit it out. All right, so let's see. Let's add something. Let's say create, we need to resolve it, right? We need to resolve it. We can say we need to do another then. That's going to look ugly. Let me clean this up a little bit. So I'm going to say that fetch. Let me clean this up then. And then I'm just going to return this. Return that. Okay, so here's the then response. Excellent. So where would I be able to? Where would I want to be able to do with whatever comes back from the server? I would like to re-render the entire list, right, with a brand new list of users, and that would happen where? It would happen right here, right here. So here's a create user. It comes back with this data from the JSON with the parse the array of users, and here we can then pass it to, for instance, what the append this handle users, right, which is the array of users, and then appends it to every single a new copy into the table of users, right? So we can pass it to handle users here. Pass it to handle users, which will be the one who actually adds it to the table. Let's try that again. Let's see. Oh well, bogus. I mean, we have tons of these brand new users, right? Let's add another one. Create. Did it not? Did we get an error? Read property then. Did I not return? Return, and then, okay, I need to do another return here. Return, fetch, yada, 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 yada. Let me try it again. Let's try it again. Oh, let me use one that we know it's going to be that one, right? Oh, www. Create. All right, it looks like it added a whole bunch of other folks, right? But notice that my W is way at the bottom. Why did that happen? So it looks like it is returning correctly, but it's appending all of them at the bottom, right? Because we never clear the content of the original table. Yes? No, we're trying not to ever reload the page. Okay? The next topic that we're going to look at is called single page applications, and the mantra there is you never reload the page, right? We manipulate the DOM, right? We remove things programmatically, we add things programmatically, but never actually reload, right? So we do changes incrementally to the page, but we never actually throw away everything. So let's do that. So basically, the last portion of this is here, right before iterating over the users and re-rendering every single user, which is going to clear the entire content of the page, right? So well, not all of it. We only need to remove what? The content of what? Of the body, right? The content of the body we need to remove, but not everything. We really don't want to remove this one over here. We want to remove, let's see, what could we do? We could probably put this TR, in the TH, right? And then whatever's in the body, we can just remove it and clear it out. We could do that, right? So let's do that. So first, let's make sure that this still works. All right. So create. All right, it adds it at the bottom. What we want to do is that we're going to grab the body and just empty it. All right, so here we're going to say grab the body with jQuery. Grab the body, the T body, right? And then empty it. Empty says, whatever you had, content you had there, just remove any content there, and then re-render from scratch. So let's see. Let's add a brand new one. Create. There it is. Notice that 444 is being appended, right? Having re-rendered the entire page. It looks lightning fast, but it had to copy and append every single one of them. But we have 444 at the bottom. Yes? That makes sense? Questions? Right. So I'm going to commit this to the repository, right? And feel free to use this technique to be able to go back to the server and be able to create new instances on the server side. All right. Excellent.